Welcome to the Freedom Fridays podcast. With me, your host, Pete Clark, the Whispers guy. Work seems to expand to the time that we give it. And I've been investing my time, occasionally on a Friday, to explore how we use our time, our energy, our attention, and the impact it has on our identity. I've been exploring over season 1 some of the mindset shifts in the handcuffs of I have to the freedom of I choose to. And I've shared some conversations, some tips, some tools about how you might want to invest your own time, your own energy, your own attention. How you might want to, if you choose to, make some changes to your identity. How you might have freedom from I have to and design a life around I choose to. If that's of interest to you, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom Fridays podcast, where this week I've got someone to chat to, and I'm going to be a little bit indulgent. It's actually an interest of mine, so forgive me if I ask questions that I'm really interested in, and I hope that you are too. But the person I'm speaking to is a long-time colleague. I've known my guest for about 20 odd years, and he described himself as an unlikely mindfulness teacher, which we're going to explore. So, Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Pete. Great to be here. Looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Yeah,
bit of a different one.
Yeah, good. So, Paul, I'm going to pick up on the first thing. You said you're an unlikely mindfulness teacher. Tell us a little bit about that first.
Yeah, I describe myself as an unlikely mindfulness teacher because what I do now is teaching people things like, being present, mindfulness, really slowing down. But if I was to wind the clock back a number of years, I would have been one of those people that was exceptionally, I don't know if skeptical is the right word about things like meditation, but I just always thought that's not something you would ever catch me doing. I never really saw the point in it. I thought it's what people do to kind of run away from their lives and just pretend that everything's okay. And the way that I got into mindfulness, as I now know so many people do, was through a period of extreme stress and suffering, and a bit of a opportunity to try mindfulness by the way of a mindfulness 30-day challenge. And because I was in a situation at that time where I thought, I don't know what else to do, I just need some form of help to feel better, I'll give it a go. And as I gave it a go, my eyes were opened to what it was actually all about, what meditation was actually all about. And in a relatively short space of time, 30 days, my eyes were open to the point where I thought this is actually really helping me and could be a significant direction for me to now go. When I say I was skeptical about it before, I for many, many years, in my younger years and certainly in my early career, I was someone who was very interested in personal development. That came about by being an individual that really struggles with anxiety, low moods. I had many episodes of depression. And because back in the day, we didn't really talk about mental health like we do now, my way of dealing with that was to just try anything to lift myself out of a slump. So I would study anything to do with personal development, anything about peak performance, behavior change, all of that. And these strategies do kind of work. If you really start to take charge of your own state and use a number of techniques, you can get yourself to feel better. And so that kind of became my modus operandi. Anytime I would feel down, anytime I feel anxious, a bit depressed, I would rely on these techniques to manage my state, lift myself out of the mood. And I found that I could keep myself pretty much above the line most of the time, but inevitably the moment you stop doing that, those slumps come back. But it was always okay because I could just work it again. And it got to the point, you and I have been in the same field for a long time, and a lot of these techniques we teach to leaders, and they are brilliant techniques. But it got to a point where my wife and we'd recently adopted a little boy. We had a baby boy at home. Things were really busy from a work perspective, many sleepless nights because we had a newborn at home. And it got to the point where I was so depleted that the techniques weren't working anymore.
Right.
So I found I got to a point where I think, I didn't really know what burnout was at that time. But if I came close to burnout, that's as close as I've ever come. And I just felt really lost, really desperate, and needed something. And that's when this 30-day mindfulness challenge came along and gave
Wow.
me a different view of what does it mean to take care of yourself when you're in those moments of
Yeah.
particular stress and
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah. When it's raining, not just when it's the sun shining. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, Paul, you're probably familiar with 21 Whispers, which is the philosophy that the name is about. Our life whispers to us, and we tend to only do something when it shouts. And the
Mm.
21's an arbitrary number. It could be 6, it could be 462. So I'm guessing the desperation and suffering was the metaphorical 21st whisper,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
mindfulness 30-day challenge was the kind of thing that got you to do something, to take action. On reflection, what other things were happening historically that were kind of either causing the skepticism, oh, that's rubbish, that's crap, blah 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 blah, or was there anything else that was intriguing, but I daren't admit it? Were there any whispers on the way that you can recall?
I think looking back, there was probably many whispers. um, I think where the skepticism may have come from is, I grew up in a generation and a family group that weren't particularly good at expressing their emotions, and it was very much, stiff upper lip, or if someone was having a little bit of an issue with their mood, it would be, it'll be all right. Don't worry, pull your socks up, it will be fine. And so I think that at quite an ingrained level, any time I would see things like meditation and people being really vulnerable and open, it kind of goes, that family message would pour out of me going, oh, come on, pull your socks up. Just get on with it. It'll be all right. This is all a little bit woo woo, a bit, a bit too fluffy. But on the other hand, quite paradoxically, I think even from an early age, I was already asking, bigger questions around how are we all kind of connected from, I would never have used the word spiritual
Yeah.
at that time in my life. It was just a case of, isn't it a bit bizarre that we all think that we're these separate individuals just doing our own thing, when really, surely this has to be part of some big
Yeah, yeah.
joined up connected thing. And I never had the language for that. I never had any kind of direction with which to explore those questions. But I think those were the kinds of whispers along the way that
Yeah.
primed me for when my suffering became strong enough to the point where I gave mindfulness and meditation a go. Suddenly, those whispers or dots kind of all joined up,
Yeah.
and I thought, now I've got a way to explore this in quite a quite a structured way. And so I think through mindfulness, I've certainly started to understand myself so much better,
Yeah.
really started to understand something quite truthful about the human condition, but also it gives an opportunity to really explore some of those bigger questions about, the wholeness and the completeness of everything too.
I'm intrigued, Paul. Do you remember your first question or the first whisper? Do you remember how old you were and what the thought or question was, despite not having the language?
Yeah, I don't. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint an age, but it was pretty young. It was
Right,
pretty. I remember being. I'm thinking like maybe around even as young as 6 or 7,
right.
lying in bed one day and feeling a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I was overwhelmed with school or something like
Okay.
that, and just something popped into my head that said, but all of these thoughts and all of these feelings, they're just happening. You don't have to actually do anything with them. And
Interesting.
and, and it was really, I don't know where that came from,
Yeah.
but even as a 6 or 7 year old around about that time, I was thinking that's that space that you can go into seems like a little bit of a refuge. That when things get a bit overwhelming, there's another way, there's another part, and I now know this to be, just looking at things from the point of view of your awareness rather than being lost in a thought or lost in the emotion, just taking the perspective of just being aware of it all without being wrapped up with it. I think there was a part of me that kind of understood that very early on. But of course, I didn't know that that was a thing,
Yeah.
and I certainly didn't share it with anyone else. And that stayed with me, and I carried that along with me for a number of years and all the way through adulthood, just thinking that I was the only person that would think in this particular way. So I never talked about it. I thought that, oh,
Yeah.
don't be so silly. And yeah, and so that was probably one of the first times when I would
Yeah.
now, to your question, that would have been a bit of a whisper.
Um, and I don't even know if there's an answer to this, but do you think everyone goes through that and some allow it to thrive and some suppress it?
Oh no, that's a good question. I, knowing what I know now
Yeah.
of my own journey and also supporting others through, similar mindfulness journeys, is I think that there is a part of each of us that kind of intuitively gets it,
Right.
but to the point where it ever bubbles up enough for many people to even notice that it's there, I think that some do. Some will go their entire lives and never really make that connection. But it's one of those things that when you have an opportunity to sit down, if someone comes to me as a client from a mindfulness point of view, we have that opportunity to do a little bit of pointing out of, isn't it interesting that when you become aware of your experience in this way, there's something quite familiar that's always been there that we may not have seen before.
Yeah.
So when you get the opportunity to look in that direction, you kind of see something that's always been there. But I think so many people just will never really think to have that opportunity or even a reason to explore it. So it's an interesting question. I don't know, but that's my hunch.
I'm going to assume I think I know the answers, but I'm interested in you explaining why. Do you think they're missing out by not being aware, exploring it, and having that as part of their way of living?
I would say that it depends. It really does depend.
Which is the answer for all human conditions.
Yeah,
Depends.
exactly, and it's a real coachy answer,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
The reason I say it depends is because if someone is going through their lives having had, a wonderful upbringing, some great life experiences, and yeah, of course there's going to be ups and downs. Life is always a roller coaster, but if on balance someone is really enjoying their life and they get to the end of their days, look back and think that was a life well lived, never heard anything about mindfulness or spirituality or anything. They got to the end of it and they had a great life. Then happy days.
Yeah.
I think for those that reach certain moments in their lives where they they really start to struggle and suffer because of all the trials and tribulations of life. I think that to not have the opportunity to see the world through a wider, more mindful perspective is a shame, because it's available. It's
Yeah.
available. One of the things I would love to do through my work is just to make that opportunity available to a lot more people.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And then you explore the idea of the human condition, and it's hard to break free from that.
Mhm.
Very hard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the one thing one thing we all have in common is we suffer from psychology, right? You know,
Yeah.
our human condition is the one thing that connects and binds us all. And you know, I think with the way that we've evolved as a species is, you know, the way that we've evolved is great for keeping us alive, great for keeping the species going, but it's rubbish for keeping us happy. And you know, our evolution doesn't really have a vested interest in our happiness. And I
Yeah. Of
think that
course.
there is a way
Almost
for us to
opposite, you
engage.
could argue.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It makes sense. If you were going to design a system to stay alive and to keep thriving, it makes sense to make it fearful of anything that could potentially, you know, get in the way of its mission. So
Yeah.
that's what we're battling with. Yeah.
Interesting. Paul, I'm sure there are many people listening who will have heard of mindfulness, and whether it's just it's a catch-all phrase, could we maybe just explore, for example, is meditation part of mindfulness? Is mindfulness part of meditation, or it doesn't even matter? What is it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's one of those big questions that people have when they're introduced to it, because they
Yeah,
know, they hear mindfulness and they hear meditation, and is
yeah,
it the same thing?
yeah,
What I would say is that meditation is I guess you could say, is the technique or is the training grounds that we would use and learn to develop as a way to access more mindfulness. But that doesn't mean to say that meditation itself is mindfulness. Mindfulness is really the quality of being that we look to cultivate. So the definition that I like to use for mindfulness
yeah,
is it's paying attention to our present moment experiences, whether that's internally, externally, with an openness, a curiosity, and a willingness to just be with what is. So it's really about switching off that autopilot that we tend to be on most of the time, going from a doing mode into a being mode, and just being able to observe our experience without being caught up and carried away with it and overwhelmed by it. So it's a bit like the difference between being lost in your thinking
yeah.
and just being aware that you are thinking, or
Right.
being caught up in an emotion in the body, or just having that curious observation that there is sensation, that there is emotion in the body. There's
Yeah,
so I might be feeling anxious,
yeah,
but when I bring mindful to that anxiety, I recognize that the awareness of the anxiety itself isn't anxious. So
yeah,
anxiety's there, but I'm
yeah.
coming at it from a point of awareness that isn't anxious, so I can be with it rather than lost in it. And we use meditation as a way of settling the system and being able to get still and observe it in that way.
Gotcha. Great. That's a great explanation, Paul. Thank you. Let me ask maybe a philosophical question here. So I would often, with clients, in the limited experience I have of teaching mindfulness, help them make this distinction between the difference between having thoughts and being had by the thoughts.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a
And
great
everyone
way.
goes, yeah, yeah, I get it, I get it, I get it. Now, if that's true, if we are the observer, if we are the witness, or mindfulness is part of that, being the witness, answer me this if you possibly can. If we're not our thoughts and our thoughts are talking to us, doesn't that mean there's two things involved? So if it's not if we're not our thoughts, who are we talking to? And who's the witness? And what are
Yeah.
they witnessing? It's kind of like,
It,
well, discuss.
it's one of those big
Yeah,
questions, isn't it, to
yeah,
explore?
yeah,
Um, yeah. So in terms of okay, so if we're not our thoughts, what
yeah.
is doing the
We,
what's doing the knowing? And that is a question that I pose to my clients all the time. Now, it's not going to be on session one, by the way.
yeah,
When we're a little ways down the line,
yeah, yeah.
a question that you might drop into a meditation is so what is being known right now? So it could be, okay, so I'm knowing, a thought is being known. And then another question would be, okay, so what or who or what is doing the knowing of that thought? And what's really interesting, and this is, wasn't expecting to go quite this deep so soon, but what's
Well,
really interesting is that when you turn awareness on itself, so you try to get awareness to be aware of awareness,
yeah,
you start to notice that there's no center to it. So you think, where can I locate Paul in here somewhere? I've got an idea of Paul, I've got a story of Paul, but when I start to look for whereabouts in this whole experience is Paul, I can't find it.
yeah,
You can't find it anywhere.
yeah,
And that it can be, for some people it can be, oh my word, that has just totally shifted the way I think about how I'm experiencing all of this anxiety, and it could be quite comforting because what that means is that we don't become as identified with it, and we can let go of some of that enough. And for other people that can be quite unsettling
yeah,
because we all are, aren't we? We're so hooked up in our identities
yeah.
that to think that actually, well, I don't actually exist anywhere in here other than a story I've got about myself, is can be quite big. So yeah, there's the thought and there's the awareness of the thought. So who's doing the knowing of the thought? I would say just have a look, just try and investigate, try and find it. And the phrase which takes a little bit of sitting with, but eventually you realize that the not finding is the finding.
Okay. Now you're blowing me away.
Yeah, right. Didn't expect
Not
to go here
find
today,
is the finding.
Pete.
Okay. I can see, I can accept philosophically why that could be the case, or at least hold the possibility that that could be the case. And I guess, I'm not spooking anything here. I guess that's part of the philosophy, right? Is the not finding is, well, that's the point.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
is no point. That's the point.
yeah. And it's, I think one of the ways in which that realization can end up being quite helpful
Yeah.
to individuals when they're going through a hard time is because we sit with our thoughts so often, and our thoughts can be quite difficult to be with sometimes.
Yeah.
The way that we relate to our circumstances, to what's going on, is so much of the suffering comes through the identification and
Yeah.
the ownership we take of them. And in mindfulness terms, we might think of the mind and thoughts as being like a sixth sense. So, in the same way as we know we've got our five senses, and that's how we experience the world. From a mindfulness point of view, we would include the mind itself as being a sixth sense because it's just happening, and it's shaping the way in which we experience our lives and our circumstances and all of that. But it's happening in the same way that when we open our eyes, seeing happens. I don't get to choose whether or not I see what's in front of me. I open my eyes and it's there. If a loud noise was to happen, over in the distance, as soon as it goes off, I cannot not hear it. I don't get a choice about that. And it's the same with our minds. Our minds will be active and we don't get a choice whether they're active or not. We just receive that. But what's different with our minds versus a sound is we don't necessarily identify with the sound that we've heard, but we will identify with whatever the mind throws up, and we feel that it's us.
Oh
I now take this personally. I've identified with it, and
gosh.
so much of our suffering and heartache comes through that process of identification. So when we can start to look, what's really going on is a thought's coming up. Oh, I know, I can see where this identification is happening, and we learn to let that go. We
Yeah.
just hang out as the awareness of it. It starts to move from being this concept that we are not our thoughts to it starts to become your felt experience that you are
Yeah.
not your thoughts, and that's when things start to shift.
It's maybe a linguistic thing here, but I'm wondering if we get practiced enough and we don't pick up the thought, then there's nothing to let go.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's going to come, but it will come,
Even.
it will peak and it will fade, and
Yeah.
if at any time you're not picking it up, getting yourself wrapped up in it,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's like, the metaphor we use is it's like a cloud passing over the sky.
Yeah.
And you yourself, your awareness is the sky, and all the thoughts are just clouds that pass across it.
Yeah.
But so often we identify with being the clouds themselves.
Paul, with your study and experimentation and understanding of mindfulness and the human condition, do you have any views on what, why do we do this to ourselves? Because it seems it's ubiquitous across everyone to some degree. Everyone causes to some degree their own suffering. Why?
Yeah, I mean, why is quite a tough question to answer. I think it has a lot to do with, I think it has a lot to do with that evolution question. It
Right,
makes sense from an evolutionary point of view if
right.
evolution just wants to get your genes into the next generation,
Yeah,
to err on the side of caution and to try to eliminate all threats. So one way that we do that is to become anxious and frightened of anything that could potentially get in the way of doing that.
yeah,
But when we actually start to break down, where is the actual suffering coming from? It's coming less from what's actually going on
yeah,
and more because of the mechanics in our minds, which are so heavily conditioned to grasp at things that we haven't got, to crave for things that we haven't got. So if there's something that I haven't got that I believe that I need and I haven't got it, there's suffering there
yeah,
because I'm craving for it and I haven't got it. It also comes from the mental move of trying to resist and push away things that are already here but we don't like. So there's suffering there as well, and it also comes through the things that we've got that we like that we become overly attached to.
yeah,
So, for example, and the reason why attachment creates so much suffering is because we live in a world that is constantly changing, and everything is on the move, and anything that we become attached to is at some point going to either change or go away or break. And it makes it sounds a little bit macabre, but when through the I guess the mindful investigation and this learning to let go, we start to become into a much more peaceful relationship with the way things are. So, which is why in mindfulness there's a lot of practicing on being very accepting, being able to allow things to come, allow them to go. Doesn't mean that you can't really enjoy your life. You can enjoy your life beautifully. You can savor it, but while you're savoring it, you're savoring things while they're here,
yeah,
and allowing them to leave when they need to leave.
yeah,
So, and you do that with patience and acceptance.
yeah. Paul, let's lift it up a little bit. Um, for anyone who's listening who suffers, anxiety or worry, um, in the practice of mindfulness? First of all, what are some of the big mistakes that they make?
Yeah, I think the when folks are practicing mindfulness or meditation for the first time is to think that the goal of meditation is to sit down, or mindfulness is to sit down and to clear your minds
Yeah,
of any thoughts. And the big number one reason why people say, "Oh, I can't meditate," or "I've tried that and it didn't work for me," is because they sat down and they just experienced a very normal human mind doing what all your normal human minds doing,
yeah,
which is they go bonkers.
yeah, yeah.
So
Even more
you
so.
sit down and you think that the idea is, I've got to clear my mind of thoughts, and your mind will just go nuts. The moment you sit down, it will go nuts. So when we're first learning mindfulness, it is really about getting used to the fact that it's not about clearing your mind of thought. It's just about becoming aware of when the mind is thinking, and then having the move of bringing it back to something, to on something that you want your attention to be on. Now, normally that will be some neutral anchor, like the sensations of breathing. So you sit down, you notice the breath, you pay attention to the feelings of the breath, and you just have the intention for your attention to stay there. Now, it's inevitable that your mind is going to move away and go into thought or get distracted by a sound or some sensation happening in the body. And the moment you notice that, we don't judge it, we just notice that it's happened, and the move is to bring it back to the breath. I I liken this to, I've got a 3-step formula for getting good at anything. And this is my success formula. It is
Cool.
set an intention,
Yeah.
get distracted, begin again. So we set an, and that's it. So how do we get good at having a less distracted mind? Is we set the intention to place our attention on something and keep it there.
Yeah.
Step 2 is you will get distracted.
Yeah,
So
great. I
you
love it.
get distracted. Step 2, numbers. You get distracted. Step 2, complete, successfully done. And then step 3 is you begin again. So the more you're willing to notice that you've been distracted and begin again, you set yourself on a trajectory of just being able to master it over time. So it's not about how long can I stay focused on one thing without getting distracted. It's how many times am I willing to notice it and begin again? Because most of the time, what do we do when we set an intention to get good at something? We set off on this kind of this role, and the moment we get distracted, we go, "Oh, I wasn't very good at that," and then we stop.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's so powerful. Very good. Um, I'm asking for a bit of a reveal. I'm happy to go, ask me a question about this too. Being a mindfulness teacher, obviously, you know lots. And I put myself in the same field of, I know lots about the stuff I teach about, all the kind of leadership stuff, mindset stuff. And yet I still find it so hard to apply.
Mm.
Are you the same? Do you find mindfulness hard to apply despite the practice? And so therefore I'm asking myself the question, what's the point? Why am I doing this when even I can't, after 25 years, apply it when I'd like to all the time?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah. The answer to that is yes. It's interesting. You'd imagine someone who teaches mindfulness professionally to think, well, yeah, I've got it nailed, and it's just something that I love to do all the time. Do I struggle with mindfulness? Yes, I do, and particularly when times are tough.
Yeah.
But
As in
really, as in,
times are tough externally, the
yeah,
environment, the
times are
economy,
tough externally.
yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. I've got a little boy. He's not a baby anymore, but he still seems to be allergic to sleep. And on those days where we've all had a bit of a disrupted night, I found that on the days when I'm really, really tired the next day, it is more of a challenge to hold on to that mindfulness throughout the
Yeah.
day. It is a challenge, and but it's also why we call it a practice. And it's a practice for a reason, because it's not something that you ever really reach a final destination with. It is when you apply the practice, you notice, you cannot not notice the benefits of applying it. When you stop applying it, it stops working, and our natural human conditioning will start to take over again. So I say, when it comes to practicing mindfulness, the only discipline you really need for, let's say it's for meditation, the only discipline you need is to get your bum on a seat. The moment you've managed to sit yourself down, you're already there. And then the practice will start to take over. But then there's other little things that you can do throughout the day as well. And on the days where mindfulness may be, something that isn't a top priority because you're feeling really, really stressed, is to keep it as simple as possible. So, you may not be that you're going to sit down and meditate for 20 minutes. It might be that you're just going to take a 5-minute break with a cup of coffee, stand outside, feel your feet on the floor, and just bring your attention to your senses, and just ask yourself the question, in terms of my experience, what's here right now? And just asking that question can be enough to lift you out of the automaticity of the day. And you might notice, well, what was here right now is that I was just being carried along on automatic pilot, feeling like the world was happening to me. But now I've taken this 5 minutes with a cup of coffee, I can feel my body, feel my feet on the floor, I can feel my breath, I notice my thoughts. Just asking the question can be enough to just bring you back into a sense of presence, and that reconnects you with a sense of agency. That's not to say that it's necessarily going to put you in, a wonderfully positive mood. All it means is that you can, whatever mood you find yourself in, you can be with it comfortably, without, or comfortably may be the wrong word, but you can be with it with acceptance and a sense of patience, rather than trying to resist it, fight against it. And when you do that, then you'll find that the system naturally starts to reset itself. And because we're no longer continuing to feed it with our swirling minds.
Yeah. I'm assuming, Paul, this is an ancient practice, as it's been practiced by many before us. Why does it seem like it's become more prominent in the last 10 years?
Well, you're right. It is an ancient practice. So mindfulness, as we teach it today, has its roots in Buddhist traditions, which is going back 2,600 years, and probably a lot longer before then. So it has this huge history, but why are we only really hearing about it in the last, couple of decades, and in the last 10 years, very much so? I think a lot of that has to do with, the extent to which it's been studied scientifically. So prominent neuroscientists and psychologists have given mindfulness a huge amount of attention since it started to migrate to the West, probably about 40 odd years ago. And the data is very encouraging. So all of the research suggests that having a regular mindfulness practice, when that's combined with meditation, has many significant health and well-being benefits. Just one of them being, mindfulness meditation can be as effective as any antidepressant drug without having all the side effects. It really helps us to reduce our level of stress. People find that it helps them to sleep much better. Brilliant for those that have chronic pain, where there is no real medical solution for their symptoms, but mindfulness gives them a way of relating to the discomfort of their pain in a really easeful way. And when you ease the system, that allows a lot of those symptoms to start to reduce as well. So I think that there is a lot from the scientific point of view that has helped to promote mindfulness, but also the way that the world is today as well. It seems over the last last 5 years particularly, with the pandemic, more people moving online, we're always on,
Yeah,
always being sold to, always
yeah,
in demand. And I think that each of us are living life at a pace that is faster than we can comfortably digest it.
yeah. I
Things
wonder if
like,
it's that the theory of there's a an equal and opposite reaction to every action,
yeah,
and we are so damn busy with stuff that something, someone, somehow has created this opposite reaction to, well, here's an antidote.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, look, we've always had busy lives. We've always had
Yeah,
distracted minds. I just think that we've reached a kind of with the advent of social media and AI and online
yeah,
connectivity, I think we've all been engaged in this social experiment to test how far we can push, how
yeah,
much we're able to give, and we're
yeah,
starting to reach a bit of a boundary now. And
yeah,
so, if anything, I think mindfulness is really helping folks to find that equilibrium. It's almost like, let's take it back a few steps to when we didn't feel so
yeah,
overwhelmed,
yeah.
so
That's right.
a point where we could
Um,
cope.
Paul, what are some of the myths that you've heard around mindfulness?
Um, Well, one of the biggies is that it's about clearing our minds of thoughts. The other thing is that in order to meditate, you have to. I think when you Google meditation and you see these memes of beautiful people perched on top of a mountain wearing flowy
Yeah,
like
yeah,
flowy linen clothes and that you got to sit down cross-legged and meditate for hours and the reality of what meditation can be like it is doesn't have to be anything like that. A typical meditation for me, I'd be sitting on a normal chair, like a dining chair. It might be even just for 5 minutes, and if someone was to take a picture of me while I'm doing that, it wouldn't be put on Google as an image for people to search.
yeah.
It,
You
it,
would
it can just be
photography.
very normal. Yeah, yeah,
Very normal.
exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I was always put off by the flowery, floaty language of that classic
Yeah,
thing that you might identify meditation with, and I was put off by words like standing in my truth and being a being of light and all of that. It just wasn't how I spoke. So I think it can feel just absolutely normal, just like it's you trying something
yeah.
different.
Um,
Yeah.
are there is there anything that you know about mindfulness, or anything that you wish people knew about mindfulness that you suspect they don't?
Yeah, I the thing which I like folks to know about mindfulness is that it's not about necessarily making yourself feel all positive like all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, of course we all want to feel positive, but
yeah,
what I truly appreciate about mindfulness, and I think where many people that give it a go have a sense of relief, is that it's not about trying to make yourself feel any particular way. It's about coming to a point of a more easeful relationship with life as it is. So you don't have to change anything about your life in order to start feeling like you have a much better, more easeful relationship with it. It's more about how much can I be in acceptance of the way things are and let things go than it is about just trying to be in a positive frame of mind
yeah.
all the time. I think it's really important that we each learn how to be with life rather than try to kind of force engineer it all the
Yeah.
time.
Let's assume someone who's listening goes, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to give that a go." How do they start?
Well, I always say if what you want to do is just put your toe in the water and see what it's like, I would suggest either downloading an app something like Headspace. I think the 10% Happier app is a great place to start, and just try out a few, 5-minute meditations. But I always say, when you're giving it a go, give it a fair crack, because you know what it's like. When we approach things, we might have preconceived ideas of what to expect. So approach it with a completely open mind. Anyone that wants to take maybe a 7-day challenge, I've got a 7-day mindfulness course that people can take from the
Right.
website.
Yeah, we'll put
And
that in the show notes.
yeah, great. And I would say just go lightly and give it a go.
Yeah.
There's so many mindfulness meditations or mindfulness exercises that you can try on YouTube, on my website. But with mindfulness, it's one of those things that you really start to feel the benefits when you give it a little bit of time and consistency. You're
Yeah.
probably not going to feel that your life has completely changed and transformed after a 5-minute lunchtime meditation for the first time.
Well,
But if you give it a little bit of consistency over a period of time, then you start to notice as you're going about your day, I did relate to that challenge a little bit more easily than I
yeah.
would have done before. So it's not like there's going to be all these fireworks going off that you notice about how it's changing you, but you do start to notice that it puts you in a much more easeful relationship with all of these stresses and strains of life. So yeah, I
I'll,
would definitely
I
plug
should.
my own.
I just had a thought as you were talking when I even asked the question, "How do you start?" And I wrote down in a way that you can continue regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It is far better to meditate for 5 minutes a day than it is to meditate for 1 hour once a week.
Yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, exactly. And even if you can't manage 5 minutes, start with 1 minute. You don't even have to sit down. You just have to, stand and just, feel your feet on the floor, feel the breath coming in and out. And what typically happens is you set the intention to be mindful for a minute. That minute will go like that, and you think, oh, I might as well carry on for another minute. And it's the phrase which I use with my clients all the time is short moments many times,
Yeah.
which tends to be how we benefit from it the most.
Yeah, I agree. Um, why don't people do it then?
Well, I think a lot of what I notice, Pete, is a lot of people are really interested and they're really curious about it. And we have this, because life is so busy, I think time is the biggest factor. Even where am I going to find these 5 minutes to give it a go? Because it's not just the 5 minutes of practicing, it's the 5 minutes, you've got to make space around that 5 minutes to give it a go. So I think folks really feel up against it from a time point of view. But I think even more than that, if we were to be honest with ourselves, what stops us doing it is the fear of sitting down and being quiet with our own minds for just a few minutes at a time, because we don't know what is my mind going to throw up, and
Yeah.
there's that classic. I can't remember the phrase or the quote completely, but that idea of put someone in a room by themselves. If you can sit by yourself in a room, with just your thoughts and be content with that, then that's a great place to be. But I think a lot of us really struggle with that.
Yeah, I
And
think there is some research about that people would rather have, loud rock music played than be with themselves.
yeah, there was one study where they put people in a waiting room for, I don't know, maybe it was like half an hour, and it was absolutely silent. There was nothing else. They didn't have their phones or anything available. But there was a little device in the room where people could give themselves an electric shock. And what happened, it was absolutely fascinating, is that after a while of just being in that room, people started using this device to give themselves these shocks because they would rather have the shock than be left alone with, by themselves with their own thoughts, because they're in control of that. It's stimulation. It's totally incredible.
Yeah, and you can see that happening now today with the proliferation of all things social media and phones and, the billions of dollars in the huge minds that have set in place things that, most normal people like you and I just can't get out of because it's designed to trick us and trap us. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if for no other reason than just to start to retrain your mind how to pay attention well, I think that's probably a great reason to get started.
Yeah. Paul, it's been fascinating on a personal level talking to you. Perhaps I'll last couple of questions from me. Um, if there was one message that you wanted humanity, a country, an organization, a family, an individual to hear,
Mm.
based on what you've learned and what you're teaching, what would it be?
It might sound a bit fluffy, but I mean it with all sincerity. It would be to focus on being intentionally kind, even when being kind feels like it's quite a difficult thing to do. Because I think kindness is what connects us to our common humanity. Everybody suffers in their own way, and we all suffer because we all have the human condition. So when I'm suffering, I know that it is not unique to me. Everyone on the planet has the capacity to do it in that way. And when we recognize that we are all in this together, it doesn't make sense to be anything other than kind. And when we are kind to each other, I think everyone wins.
I think that's a very poignant and beautiful message to pause on. Paul, for anyone interested, how do we get in touch? Have you got a website? Have you got places people can connect with you? How do we do that?
Yeah, probably the best place to get in contact with me is through the website. It's pauldalton.coach, as in the word coach.
Yeah.
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to look me up on LinkedIn, it's Paul Dalton Mindfulness on LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
through the website, you'll see that you can join my weekly newsletter. I've got a podcast that goes out quite regularly as well. For anyone interested in this kind of stuff, wants to learn it a bit more, then be glad to have you on board.
Great. Well, you described yourself at the start as an unlikely mindfulness teacher. I think through this conversation, there's at least someone somewhere that is now more likely to try some mindfulness. So, on their behalf, thank you. Thank
Oh,
you
you're
for
very welcome.
explanations, for responding to the questions, and just sharing some ancient and modern wisdom about some of the benefits and practices of this thing called mindfulness.
It's been such a pleasure, Pete. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.